others to do the same. And welcome to the third of a 4-part series, How Lovely is Thy Dwelling Place?
All right, so welcome to everybody. I wonder if we might open in prayer. The Lord be with you. Almighty God, we ask your blessing on our time together as we learn, as we imagine, and as we create spaces in which we are aware of the ways in which you dwell with us. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. So I wonder if folks might be able to mute themselves. I'm at least getting a little bit of feedback from some folks. Thank you. All right, I'm going to endeavor to share my screen with you. Okay, so can someone tell me if that's working?
Nope, it's
Not
working.
yet, not yet.
Okay. Interesting. Boykin and I just tested this. So you're not seeing it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Let's
It's
see.
Fascinating.
Murphy's Law, you know.
It is, naturally. Let me try this again.
Nothing yet.
All right. Let me try this once more with feeling. And I would say, of course, this happened. Boykin, can you affirm that we did just in fact test
We
this?
did, and I'm gonna try to spotlight and unspotlight you to see if that makes a difference. My gosh, that's so.
What's that, man?
What did that mean when we saw a red C in the middle of the screen?
Oh, that's just the name of our account. This is the COTC webinars account that I came in on. But Elizabeth Marie, I wonder if you could email me the. Yeah, I know what I'm going to do. Well, no.
Let me try this one more time.
Would it help just to start again, or would that not?
That's what I'm trying to
Oh, look,
just
it's
start it
happening. It's
all
happening.
over
It's
again.
happening.
Yeah, yay, there you go. You got it.
Got
Okay,
it.
okay.
A technological wizard she is.
That is a generous expression, Boykin. Okay, so is it working now?
It is working perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So y'all just see a slide that says, how lovely is thy dwelling place?
That's right.
All right, perfect. So here we are. We are in the third part of a series, drawing from that hymn that I think perhaps hearing just the phrase is calling it forth in all of our minds. How lovely is thy dwelling place? And this week we're thinking about home. So where have we been? We started with Amanda and hearing about the Feast of the Epiphany, the idea of manifestation, the ways in which the gifts, the Christ child, prefigured his death, the ways in which his glory is revealed in the world, and then upcoming at the Feast of the Presentation, we'll think about Simeon and Anna and the ways in which they saw and experienced God's glory. Then last week with Mary Cat, we thought about Epiphany as God's love dwelling among us in the body. So we talked about how we use our body in worship, what we eat and drink, how we're mindful of our physical, corporeal selves as dwelling places for God. And I know at least in our small group breakout room, we had some really profound conversation. And so this week, we think about God dwelling with us in our homes. So I want to invite you all to share with one another. And Boykin, if I need to stop screen sharing to do this, you tell me. But I actually want to invite us to talk as a group for a moment about how we define home. How do you think about home? Do I need to pause sharing to do this?
No, if anybody wants to share, they can unmute and jump in and.
Okay.
For me, it is not always a dwelling place. It's more about the people that are with me than an actual physical place.
Mm-hmm.
This is Boykin. I will say in the last year, the physical place has become, so much more a part of my conscious life, though. I mean, we spend so much time in our homes that my relationship with my home has changed in the last year.
This is Linda. For me, it's a follow-up on what Carol said. It's a place for belonging. To follow up on what Boykin said, I think it's also a place for solace and beauty.
Mm.
Refreshing, to be refreshed.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel that, go ahead, Alice.
No, please, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, home is where I am comfortable, where I have peace and I have freedom to be who I am and to make mistakes, and it's okay.
So somebody will have to help me with this, but somebody once said, or maybe more than once said, that home is the place where when you go there, they have to take you in.
Yes.
And that does it pretty well for me, because it includes not only the physical place where I live, but it includes my parish church and other areas where I congregate. So.
Alice, I love that comment because I'm thinking of the eternal sense of home, and they have to take us in, we believe.
Thanks, Sandy.
This is Marcia. It's also for most of us a place of safety, along with the solace and beauty and all that. Partly now because we're hiding out from other people in a pandemic, but also because for most of us, it probably is normally a place of safety. But that thought also leads to the fact that so many people do not have safe homes, and that domestic violence has gone up in this terrible time of everybody being restricted in where they can go. So that's one more thing.
And I'd like to add to that, in this time, so many people are in danger of losing their homes. I mean, that's a huge fear and I know that there have been the idea of evictions and putting a moratorium on evictions and people who can't pay their mortgages. And I'm also reminded, and I don't know the whole thing about this, but it's something in my childhood, a game we used to play, and I don't know, it could have been a New York City street game. Well, it was a New York City game, and it was played on the street. So I don't know if people here had games like that where we were out in front on the street watching for cars. But it was one of these things where you ran around and you ran to bases. And if you got back to home base, the person who did that, and people were taken captive. And the person who got to home base would yell, "Home, free, all." So that, you were freed. The prisoners were freed when the leader, I guess, and I don't remember all of the rules of this game, but that notion of home and everyone is going to be free. It's a liberation. Do you play games like that in the South? No. Yeah, someone says yes.
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Well, it's kind of based a little bit on baseball, it seems to me. It was a modification. I don't know. I also grew up in New York. I don't know.
But there was no ball involved. It was a kind of a tag game.
Right.
It's like capture the flag.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a
Yes.
thought about how they define home that they want to share?
Yes.
Well, it seems to me home has something to do with that feeling of being nurtured and nurturing. And that's kind of very essential to my own sense of my own home. Anyway.
All right. Thank you all. So I want us to think about home as God came to the people of Israel as a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. So in Exodus, we hear, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. And so this was during their wanderings, during the Exodus. And this scripture evokes for me this notion that home is at one level, at least scripturally in our tradition, deeply rooted in the fact that God dwells with us even when home is not a fixed place. Even when home is not a fixed place, that there is this notion of God traveling and being present with us. Anyone recognize where this might be? It's the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. It's home to almost 200,000, about 196,000 refugees. And in my peace building graduate work, I had a handful of classmates at the Center for Justice and Peace Building who grew up here in this refugee camp from different places in East Africa, several from Sudan, or what is now South Sudan. And they talked about home not as a static place, not as a place that was fixed, but perhaps as the place where you were. And so for me, they echoed that notion of God as a pillar of smoke or as a pillar of flame, journeying with us in those places in which we made home. And that was a powerful notion for me, because I think perhaps in the context from which I come, when I first think of home, I imagine the place where I go to sleep at night. But what if that is not a fixed place for you? What if that is not a place that is safe? And so as we continue to think about home, I want to make it a little bit, sort of tease out some complexities for us. And I'm reminded of the season that I served in Denver, Colorado. And while I was there, the parish took a parking lot that was in between the cathedral and a liquor store. The way you knew our parish, I'd say, oh, we're in downtown Denver, right near the Argonaut liquor store. And that meant that was a marker by which people knew where the parish was in town. And so home was created through collaboration with the St. Francis Center to create the St. Francis Square apartments. These were 50 units of permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing means there are the wraparound services to help folks stay housed and to be able to stay safe. So this was, for me, as we think about epiphany and manifestation and God dwelling with us, another manifestation of home and of ways that community, Christian community, religious community cares and shares home. Think of an example right here in our own community with IFC Home Start, or did anyone get to attend the IFC grand opening of the IFC Commons? I don't know if folks got to do that. I was on our vestry meeting, but that central location for accessing services with dignity for all in our community. I think about that as a moment of home in our communities. I mean, the Home Start specifically for families and single women. Maybe you're thinking about home as Habitat and the work that Habitat does in our community, helping to craft home, or our work as a parish collaborating with a refugee support center, thinking about how do we help refugees from Burma or from Cote d'Ivoire or from Rwanda here in our community create home, and how is God present in that? I want to turn us to another story from the scriptures. Luke chapter 8, it's a story of the Gerasene demoniac. So here's a mosaic of that image, and the demons, which are legion, are cast out from the man, cast into the herd of swine who ran off the hill, and the man who's been healed, who's been freed, who's been given back his sense of self, who's been given back his sense of home in his body as home, he wants to follow Jesus. What does Jesus tell him to do? He says, no, don't follow me. Return home, the Greek word oikos, return home and tell how much good God has done for you. Return home and tell how much good God has done for you. And so that for me evokes this idea of home, perhaps not just as a specific locale, but maybe as a region. And home perhaps as a way of being, that in returning home, we are invited to over and over again tell the good news of what God has done for us. All right, I want to pause. Any questions, any comments, thoughts, ideas that have come up for folks? I'm sorry, I'm looking between two screens. So if I want to look over and see your faces, I have to look at a different screen.
I'm just thinking about bringing you into my home just now. So I thought I would share that.
Yeah.
It's an unusual thing, you know, because while we're so isolated, on the other hand, we're used to gathering at church, at least I am, and not bringing each other into our homes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I want to piggyback on what Lita has said, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times in some other groups. I think for those of us who are Zooming, our connection, our broadening of the sense of home and relationships has greatly enhanced because the people that we talk with are in our home. Your sermons are given to me at my house. You're talking to me at my house, just as Lita said. Father Noah's sermon was given to me at my house. And so the intimacy of having people in my house at a time when it feels so vacant has had a phenomenal impact on how I listen to people and how I am able to connect with people that I don't even really know well, first all.
Thank you, Carol and Lita. And that in a way, y'all have offered a nice segue into thinking about dwelling at home in this season. How does God dwell with us at home? God dwells with us in whatever kind of space or place we call home. If we live alone, if we live in a community house, if we are single, if we have roommates, if there's a passel of children making it hard to concentrate, God's dwelling among us. And so how are we attentive to that? Maybe you have a home altar. I don't know if you do, but here is an image of a home altar that was shared with me by a fellow parishioner. She reached out after we'd done one of the communions at home where you could come to church, pick up the Eucharist to then receive reverently at home. And she sent me an image of the altar that she had set up with a crucifix that had been created by her parents. And I thought that this was a beautiful image and snapshot and glimpse into one another's homes. But I also wonder if home and the way in which God dwells with us hasn't been made even a little bit more complex. Think about how much, at least our children, are doing this for school, and perhaps the ways in which we are using these remote platforms to have meetings, to stay connected, to be church family, not only for Bible study, but for this mutual support and deepening of relationship. And so it is, I think, in these virtual platforms, I want to suggest, expanded the notion of home. While it may not feel the most comfortable to us, that we have expanded home into these remote dwelling places. So I want to take a few minutes in which we can break out into smaller groups and answer two questions. One is, how have you experienced God dwelling with you at home? And you might contextualize that specifically in this season of pandemic and COVID, and perhaps remaining closer to home. You might think of that more expansively over the course of your life. And then what practices might you adopt to cultivate attentiveness to God's presence at home? Because the reality is, God is present with us all the time. And it's a matter of us being attentive to that presence with us and among us. So I think Boykin is gonna share us out into breakout rooms. And if we can just spend about 10 minutes out in our respective rooms answering these two questions.
Any meeting, anything on Zoom as far as
Okay.
people. Not, I thought you were forced to go.
I did too. Now I know.
We're coming back.
So just a brief sharing out. What did folks hear in terms of either themes around how folks have experienced God dwelling with them, or particular practices that folks use to cultivate their attentiveness to God's presence with them? Anybody? Oh, Marcia, you want to share?
Yeah, I'm ready to start. We talked about, sort of in summary, having a home altar, which some people did, creating a nest for oneself where it's safe and quiet and the reading material is there, enjoying the dawn as it slowly comes across, and walks out of doors. And I talked about my daily walk in the cemetery at the end of my street, where there's always a patch of sunshine in the afternoon, and all those graves are there to think about and to enjoy. And I know another parishioner also comes there. We ran into each other last week. Walking the dogs, some people talk about. So that's a few of our choices.
I can
Alice.
speak for the group that I was in briefly, and the altar was one thing that came up. Morning devotions with intentional prayers for those having birthdays or special needs on that day. Blessing the home came up in one case. And let's see, some of us participate in small groups, in centering prayer groups, in other parish groups, which seem to mean more and more to people over this past year. Let's see, some people have expanded their outreach activities, even though they can't leave their homes, and they do it in some official type public ways, and in some ways such as continuing to pay those who would clean for them but can't now, or whatever. So that's just a few of the ways that came up in the group I was in.
Thank you.
So I was struck in our little group by how different, what different times of day in different areas of our day, each of us found the answer to the first question of our experience of God. So one of us said, you know, sort of dawn, first thing in the morning. One of us said evening when all the work is done. One of us said during meal times. So I was struck by that, the fact that it is very different for different people. And in terms of practices, I guess we talked more generally about how easy it is to let that slip, how easy it is to be too busy, and how important it is to either have a physical place, as Alice was just discussing, or maybe it was Marcia, or a physical time of day that you focus on thinking about God's presence.
Thank you. It really is having those markers that anchor us is an important part of ensuring that that habits and practices continue. Anybody else from their group?
This Linda, am I unmuted?
You are.
Oh, okay. I just lost the Zoom. We talked a lot about meditation, and Jane talked about belonging to doing a silent meditation with a group that she belongs to. I talked about my writing as meditation, and looking at the manifestation of the Spirit when you're called on to write and really pay attention, whether it's in essays or poetry. And we even talked about brushing our teeth and our waking up in the morning and taking time listening to what's around us.
I love that idea of taking a regular part of our day, the act of toothbrushing, right? And that being perhaps a marker for us to be aware of God's presence and dwelling with us. I'm gonna move this over here. So,
Can I
please.
add something to Linda's? It's not my Pilates. I don't do that. But I said that I do belong to a meditation group, but once a month, we have a day of silence in our home, separately. And silence can be, well, for me, the important parts are no reading, no watching screens, no listening to radio, just to be. And go about our daily tasks. I'm not saying we don't do anything, in a more attentive way.
Yeah. So some of what I'm hearing you say, Jane, is how do we eschew those distractions, right? Those things that draw our attention away.
Yeah. And
so,
it's also about not only paying more attention, but to what is around us, but also what is in us, what's happening internally, the emotions, the mood, etc.
Yeah. So that it is not just the externalities, but the internal attentiveness of what is arising, what is there, perhaps what is absent. So as we have talked about ways that we've experienced God at home, or ways that we've experienced God through practices in the environs of home, perhaps expanding that definition of home, I wanted to share an image of one of my, it is not an altar, but it's an icon that I, pick your verb, painted, wrote. People debate about what verb you should use with icons, of St. Michael. And it is, for me, having it up in the home, it's a reminder not only of that process of having created the icon and the incising of the lines, reminding me of our baptism, the layering of the natural pigments, making the egg tempera. But if you see the little squiggly white lines coming off of his neck, those are reminders that apostles, that those who are sent are in action. And so for me, stopping and seeing the icon is this reminder that we are both in action in the world, putting our faith in action, and yet, as Jane was talking about, needing those spaces for silence that are free from distraction, to be attentive to both what is internal and external. So I wanted to offer us, as we close, to think about the Ignatian Examen. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this, and we could get very in-depth, and you could go on a month-long Ignatian retreat. But to put it in sort of the simplest terms, it is the practice of having a fixed point in the day at which you stop and you look over the day and you ask, where were points of consolation and where were points of desolation? So where in the day did I sense God's absence? Not because God was absent, but because I was not attuned to God's presence. What things were death dealing? What kind of felt like it sucked the life out of me? And what was consoling? What were consolations? What were moments where I felt enlivened, where I sensed God's spirit, where I felt joy and God's presence? And so I wanted to offer that out to us as perhaps a tool that we could take with us that is appropriate for times of COVID and times without COVID, that has stood. It's a spiritual practice that has stood over centuries of helping people be attuned to God's presence. So I wanted to offer that out to folks. And I want to stop screen sharing. See if I can do that. Have I stopped screen sharing?
You have stopped. You have stopped already.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Good. Great. So anyone used the Examine before or use it currently? Alice, I can see Alice's hand. Others? There's a great simple book called Sleeping with Bread that it's being attentive to that which gives you life. And it's a simple illustrated book, but that might offer an easy access point to some of those, some of the Ignatian practices, if that's of interest to anyone.
What was the name of the book?
Sleeping with Bread, like a loaf of bread, and the author's last name is Lynn, Linn.
Were you going to show us your icon?
I did the background of that slide that had the Ignatian Examine that came up. That was the icon.
I never saw it.
Yeah.
You weren't screen sharing then.
It did not come
Oh, I
up.
wasn't?
No.
Well, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can try again. Can you see it now?
Yes.
It's coming. Yeah. Show us some more. Can you make it bigger?
Let me try here. I thought I was. Let me see if I can do this. Flip to the end here.
Oh, I see it.
There we go. Can y'all see it now?
Yeah.
That's what was supposed to be happening.
Right.
It was actually nice. It was nice to imagine it first and now see it.
Yeah.
Okay,
I agree.
good.
I
Well,
agree.
now
I agree.
now you can see the little white wings that I was talking about coming out of his neck. That's a very stylized thing that happens in iconography. So if you ever see those are markers of apostles who have been sent out, and it's supposed to be the ribbons from their hair that are, flapping back as they go.
And can you tell us who the saint is again?
That one is Michael.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And you actually painted that or drew that yourself?
Yes, I did it. So there's a school called the Prosopon School of Iconology, and it's there were two Russian instructors. We hosted a week-long retreat at the cathedral in Denver, and so they came in and instructed you in the whole process of creating an icon, its theological significance, and so it's everything from incising the lines on this board that is covered with gypsum to making the paint out of like egg and ground up pigments to yes, a whole wonderful process that I commend to you should you have the opportunity. All right, now I'm going to try to stop screen sharing again. Okay. Thank you for helping me realize you weren't seeing what in fact I thought you were seeing, as I thought you were seeing it. Anybody else, anything that came up for them? Questions, ideas, suggestions?
In our group, Alice brought up is that sometimes even in the midst of chaos, pulling yourself out for a moment of thinking of God's presence can really just be enriching and help you change perspective on what feels kind of overwhelming. And I think that's a really good thing for me to keep in mind and think about.
Mm-hmm. I think it is for all of us. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody else have something for the good of the proverbial good of the order? Oh, I see Marilyn's hand.
Marilyn, you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So one way in which I'm sensing God's presence is when I'm eating right now. When I'm eating oranges or strawberries or nuts, I really enjoy my breakfast. And I think that God created the possibility. He created these foods that match with what my taste buds like. And it just makes me love God. It makes me appreciate him. So I just report that.
Thank you. What a great reminder and gift to think about the ability to taste something that tastes delicious to us and to have that awaken and enliven our senses in that way. Hugh, I can see that you raised your hand.
Well, yeah, I was a little not surprised, but one thing that I might want to emphasize is that the daily office, and there are online resources to access this on a daily basis. The Mission of St. Clair, for example.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful opportunity to provide a structured, centered time and place to do morning prayer and the daily office without having to look up a lot of citations and references. It's all done for you. But there's with and without music, and with and without sermons, but it does, I think, allow a time and place and a structure to come to God and sort of engage at that level. And of course, it's a time-honored tradition within Anglicanism to use this resource.
Thank you for that. And Mission St. Clair has a great resource, and Forward Day by Day has an app and it populates, much like Mission St. Clair, with all the readings. So you're not having to look up citations. It makes it very easy and accessible for you to be able to do that. Thank you for that reminder and suggestion of the ability to access not only morning prayer, but we actually have, morning, noonday, evening prayer, and compline. So one of those could be, or all of them could be, a fixed point for you in your daily journey.
How do we get Forward Day by Day?
How do you access it online?
No, how do we get an actual printed copy of it?
You can order. You can Google it and order it.
You can call Ellen and ask her to send it to you, which is what I do.
Really? Okay.
I actually saw some copies taped to the welcome door for people to pick up. So I do think it's just an email.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I just, yeah.
Sarah.
I just want to know something I noticed that I've been doing this past year since I've been at home all the time. When I wake up in the morning, almost every day, as soon as I wake up and I know that I'm awake and I'm alive, I thank God for being alive. One more day.
Sandy, were you going to say something?
Yes, I was wondering if our church still has this resource. I'm not sure. I know it's probably a mirror image, but it's this little card that I got at church, and it's got the morning, noon, and night prayers. Do we still have that resource at Chapel of the Cross? You've got one, Alice, too? Yeah.
Sandy, I don't know that I've seen exactly that about which you were speaking, and it's small enough that I can't quite see what it is.
Yeah, it's
but
if you the forward movement.
It's a forward movement resource.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you might send us like a snapshot of it from your phone, so that we could take a look around and see if it's something that forward movement still puts out. Sarah, I wanted to come back to what you said. I remember once I had a group of college students on a pilgrimage to Taizé, to the monastery focused on reconciliation in France. And one of the brothers that was leading my small group talked about, what would it be when you woke up in the morning if you thought, not, my alarm went off, or, I have so many things to do today, or, but what if you took a moment and said, oh my gosh, I'm alive. God has given me another day. What will I do with this love that God has given me? And that sort of, it's a subtle shift with profound implications for how we begin the day orienting ourselves in the world. So I thank you for naming that realization. It is a consolation for all of us to think about life and gratitude in that way. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say, when I say thank you, then I say, what's the plan?
So it's this also an attendant invitation into inviting God into the balance of the day. I believe that Boykin has put into the chat box, for those who are accessing the chat box, forward movement link, or someone has, maybe Boykin. All right. Well, next week, the fourth session of this series continues, thinking about love dwelling here, love dwelling among us, as we think about sacred spaces. So I commend that session to you all. And it's a similar process of registering online, and you will receive the link. All right.
And this should be available tomorrow on YouTube. And I want to just let everybody know that the breakout rooms are private. None of that will be shared on YouTube. I should have let people know that before.
Very good. Great idea, Boykin and Elizabeth Marie. I think both having them and, of course, having them be private seems so good.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all. Go in peace.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great week.